edge kind of a thing, because slang oftentimes doesn't take. It has a very short-lived lifespan. It seemingly doesn't fit, and it dies off to be replaced by another slang term for that same kind of a concept until something does grab hold, and then that goes through the whole generation. So basically what we're doing is we're looking at slang expressions as our bleeding edge, and from there, that's one of our key timing clues, is the use of slang and how it permeates and flows through these particular kinds of discussions.
Right.
And then all the way out at the other end is legal language, because legal language has been so formalized as to become as heavy as a brick with a lifespan of a long damn time.
Yes, indeed. Well, I always try to imagine, I mean, here you compile all this data, and you start looking at it, and how do you go through and sort through to know how the pieces fit together as far as an event in Wall Street, or an event in the world, or earthquake, or tornado, or flood, or war, or what have you? How do you actually sort that?
You've just hit on it with your whole series of questions, because you basically reduced it down to their archetypes: earthquake, war, etc. So we have archetypes. And these archetypes are very well defined. An archetype might be, for instance, war, which has 44,000 nouns and verbs which describe it in our database. And whenever we find any of those 44,000, more or less, nouns and verbs associated in a particular way, then we put a tick mark next to war, which heightens that particular hue of that particular pixel group.
I see.
Makes sense?
Yes. Now,
okay, so as they kind of like brighten in a very much like a constellation or Hubble view of a very dusty universe. And as they brighten up, then this is basically what I see in my little display, is a bunch of these brightening and waning dots. And then I go ahead and stop the display, go to that area, find a group of them, and take those numbers, and then go back and resolve them back into the words and see what we're actually looking at.
Right.
And then we make an interpretation from that.
Well, 09, a lot of people are sending an email tonight that are kind of getting their predictions, kind of like tapping their psychic centers a little bit to send in their predictions, which we're putting all the emails off to the side and recording them and saving them. Which should be kind of interesting, because I've been reading through a lot of these that have come through and just kind of making mental notes of them. So when we start talking about a lot of things here with you're seeing in the data for 09, I'm going to pull some of these emails off that kind of match with what we're talking about here tonight. So should be kind of fun. And
sure, sounds cool. Yeah.
And of course, we're going to take live phone calls from listeners out there here after the next break, and kind of bring them on for their prediction and questions for you. So we're just going to kind of do an open mind type thing as well. Which should be fun. Bring in the new year that way. It should be a lot of fun. So everybody stay right where you are, because we're close to the top of the hour here. So we do have to take a break, but we will be back in a moment. So stay right where you are. My guest tonight is Clif from Half Past Human, and we're doing a little prediction stuff for 09. It should be a lot of fun. Stay right where you are. We'll be right back. And welcome back, everybody. Happy New Year to everybody, or Happy New Year's Eve, anyway. Here we are, last show of 08. We've got Clif from Half Past Human here joining us. We're going to be talking about some of the data that he's been seeing, some possible forecasts for 09. And boy, oh boy, I got some questions rolling in from you folks out there, which I don't mind at all. Feel free to email me, CaptainJack@WPRTradio.com. I will keep a close eye on the emails tonight. We're going to be talking about a couple of things here right off the bat. One of them, a Russian professor has been talking about the fall, the destruction of the United States economically, and which would lead into a civil war. Part of Canada would move in, take over part of the United States. Of course, Alaska would go back to Russian control. Which is kind of interesting, and this is what he's been predicting for a long time. He says that the numbers are good. The data is positive on this. I don't know. Let's, Clif, did you see that article about that guy?
Yeah, I've read the article, and I went and read some of the underlying research, and I have to say I don't disagree with a lot of it, but I do have a lot of suspicions about his conclusions. That is to say, the particular way in which he says the U.S. would break up and be assigned, if you will, to other countries.
Yes.
because on its face, it denies the complexity of the situation, and it's seeing the United States from outside the U.S. So he has no idea how gnarly it's going to get once we get to scrapping among ourselves and just what we would do. But one thing I can assure you of is that the United States in general has a predisposition culturally to not want to necessarily align with people. And so I think that even if we were to dissolve, it would be kind of like a nest of badgers. We wouldn't really want to go and associate with the badgers next door.
Yes,
so his conclusions that far I find to be erroneous.
Might be wishful thinking on his part, because I know that
exactly. It's a projection of certain power situations that exist now. Yes. He fails to take into account, for instance, that China is historically loath to extend power across oceans.
Yes.
Has only done so in Africa for resources. Will also be facing the collapse of the dollar, which is going to trigger all of this, and will have severe repercussions on their society. They'll be facing revolution internally. He's probably correct in that Russia probably will not face revolution the way that pretty much the rest of the planet will. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Russia is going to extend itself to the point of becoming a planetary policeman and trying to keep the former United States from destroying itself internally.
Yes.
Makes sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I know that in one of the articles, whenever they were talking to him about this, he kind of coyly smiled at the idea of the United States kind of falling apart, but he did say that if that were to happen, it wouldn't be so great for Russia, though, either.
Correct, yeah. It's not a good thing for anyone.
Yes.
In our data sets, we actually can't deny the underlying theme that economic pressures will push us to the brink and beyond. Now, what that beyond is going to be is his supposition would be that we would have some level of civil war or dissolution. That may be correct. We may have a dissolution, but I doubt it'll fracture out along the way that he thinks.
Yes, but you're definitely seeing something in the data that kind of suggests that he may be correct on this, though, right?
To a certain extent, it validates his position, but his position, let's bear in mind, is in isolation. He does not note that the same pressures that are going to create revolution in the U.S. are also going to create revolution throughout Europe, through most of the Anglo-American Empire, and certainly in China and in its area of influence. So yes, we do see revolution, but in our data set, it really shows up as more global.
Yes.
It may be sparked by things in the U.S., but it pretty much all comes out at about the same time.
Yeah,
the time frame is seemingly accurate, though.
All right, which makes sense, though, because, I mean, when all this stuff was going on in Wall Street and everything was collapsing and falling apart and the dollars were dropping, I mean, that was a global thing. I mean, it was happening everywhere. I mean, even other countries were talking about bailout packages for banks in their countries as well. So we saw it all across the world, in a sense. Let's be clear about this, though. Let's not apply the language you're using. We have indeed seen this, but we are currently still seeing this. It is not a done deal. We're right in the middle of it, and it hasn't even really started to blossom yet. True, which was going to be my next question. What are you seeing for the future as far as, is it going to stabilize eventually or no? Yes, it will stabilize. That's a given, because the humans oscillate between chaos and order pretty much. But it won't necessarily stabilize as people understand it now. In our data sets, for a number of years, we've had a postulate that says the longer we see particular language showing up, the more impact it's going to have. And so, for instance, something that's really going to have a huge impact we might see 6 months or a year out, like the tsunami we saw, I think, 8 months out. That sort of a deal. The economic thing here we saw coming a couple of years in advance. But above and beyond the economic, we've had this meme, this thought pattern of death of dollar that's been around for probably 5 or 6 years. And the death of the dollar is going to be traumatic for the whole planet. So it will stabilize, but it won't stabilize with you using a dollar and having a grocery store to go to and spend that dollar in. You may end up with some form of script temporarily. We're going to go through just horrific times as the dollar itself dies. And the existing power structures, the real problem we have at the moment is that everything you're going to hear coming out of Washington, D.C., in spite of the fact that they're claiming change, is merely going to be at a big picture level to try and prop up the existing system, which is based on the dollar and paper debt.
So they are doomed to failure because the dollar will die, as will all paper debts. So at some point in the future, according to the way in which our data lines out and the current trends that are emerging, we're going to be facing a world in which paper debt is repudiated and giant defaults of contracts back and forth. This is going to have a huge impact on the federal government. We're going to go through an 1890s style collapse of currency, in which case some areas will have local currencies spring up. Other areas will have energetic little banks that will have something that everybody thinks is collateral, and they'll form a script around it that will be traded locally. And we're going to go back to that kind of a system simply to compensate for the death of the dollar, in spite of the fact that the powers that be seem determined to introduce a new currency that will be a global currency, if you will, and be probably digidollar based, that is to say digital and not a thing. The data seems to indicate that isn't going to work, that it's just not going to go anywhere. So we're going to have the Argentina-style collapse, where after the collapse of their currency due to IMF monkeying around with things, they ended up with a whole bunch of different scripts and different approaches. And so it stabilizes, but not in support of the old existing system.
Right. Some people have sent email about this particular subject to me and said that they feel as if though all of this is kind of pre-orchestrated in order to usher in the Amero. And I know that there's even been some stock market guys on television saying people should pay attention to the Amero. The Amero is the one that keep your eye on. I mean, any input on that one?
We have all that data, but that's conscious descriptions. So we have archetypes for a new currency, but not necessarily focused on an Amero or a regional currency per se. And on a credibility level, while the Amero may indeed be issued or ushered in, the issue really is that all paper currencies have a finite lifespan. And so it's not as though it was a planned destruction of the dollar in order to create the Amero. It was the people that created the dollar in 1913 knew exactly how long it was going to last and what they could do to prop it up. And they want to have something ready to maintain their power over others when the dollar dies. And so they will offer up a new currency. Then it's just a question of whether or not we buy it.
Right. And that's pretty much what they did with the euro, isn't it? The same thing?
Correct. Correct. What they attempted to do with the euro, you note that it's not successful, that they haven't passed a pan-global or pan-European constitution. They've had a number of countries just basically say, no, get out of here. When taken to referendum, they're trying to force the Irish to vote twice, as though, repeating the act again will somehow come out with a different outcome. Well, of course it will, because they'll engineer it that way now that they know what the true feeling is. Right.
I got some questions here for you. It says, could you ask Clif his latest on the Israeli mistake as it was happening over there right now?
That is a long-term meme we've had going that we applied initially to an event and then said it was probably a process, and it really began with the Ossetia attacks on August 8th by Georgia, which was actually instigated with Zionist participation, and we're seeing probably the brutality language emerge now. I'm writing something about that in the current 1109 series, Part 0. We're going through it because the Israeli mistake was a set of words that came around the idea that the Zionists who control Israel would attempt something militarily that was beyond the pale, so to speak, going too far for nations and peoples to accept. And it would be based on brutality. It would be seen that way and would create a pariah state mentality against Israel that would ultimately lead to boycotts of all things.